They said he was the luckiest man on his street, the kind of husband every woman prayed for, the kind of father every child bragged about in school. But behind the painted walls of a quiet Port Harcourt home, a story was unraveling. A story that would leave a woman heartbroken, 2 children abandoned, and a man standing outside his own gate, watching the life he once owned slip through rusted bars like smoke through fingers. Because Jeremiah didn't just make a mistake, he made a decision. One that looked like pleasure, but ended in poverty, shame, and a gate that would never open again. You won't believe what he left behind. And you'll be shocked by what he chased instead. What kind of man walks out on gold? For glitter. And what happens when that glitter turns to ash and there's no way back? Stay with this story. Because what you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's a mirror. And maybe, just maybe, it's a warning. The day Jeremiah became a stranger to his own reflection, there was no thunderclap, no flaming bush, no scream in the street. Just silence. The kind that creeps in slowly, like termites in a foundation, until the whole house collapses without warning. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. He still wore polished shoes and drove to work in a used Toyota Corolla. But something had shifted behind his eyes, something even his children noticed. The sparkle that once danced when he returned from work now looked like a shadow pretending to be joy. No one knew yet, but Jeremiah was already gone. Adana sensed it in the little things. The untouched food. The perfunctory goodnight. The way he no longer asked about her day. But she swallowed her questions like dry EBA, too afraid to choke on the truth. She convinced herself it was stress, or maybe the bank. Men changed, after all. What mattered was that he came home every night. What mattered was that he hadn't said goodbye. But sometimes, the deepest betrayals aren't shouted from rooftops. They are whispered between footsteps and silence. And by the time you recognize the echo, the one you love has already vanished inside someone else. Jeremiah once worshipped the ground Adana walked on. She was the reason he didn't sleep hungry during his jobless years. She was the woman who sold plantain by the roadside and still returned home to iron his only shirt. When the bank finally called him for an interview, it was Adana who pressed his trousers while fasting and praying. Their love wasn't romantic in the way novels describe, but it was real. It was built with sweat, hunger, and the kind of loyalty that doesn't flinch when rent is overdue. But real love, it turns out, isn't immune to fantasy. It started with an Instagram DM he should have ignored. Clara's profile was like sugar to a starving man, filtered, seductive, and painfully curated. She had the kind of body that drew stares on the street and the confidence of someone who never had to beg for attention. When she laughed, it was loud. When she entered the room, men turned. She wasn't the kind of woman Jeremiah would have dared to chase in his 20s. But now he had a little money, a good suit, and a decade of Adana's quiet love behind him. So he replied. Just once. Clara didn't ask about his kids. She didn't care that he had a wife. She only wanted one thing, fun. And for a man whose life had become spreadsheets, screaming toddlers, and burnt rice, Clara was a fantasy dipped in honey. Lunch became drinks. Drinks became secrets. Secrets became hotel keys. It was never meant to be serious. It was just supposed to be an escape. But addictions rarely announce themselves at the door. They sneak in, charming and small, and before long, they own the house. Jeremiah was still smiling at home. Still attending church. But inside, he was disappearing. Adana noticed the new perfume. She smelled it on his collar, foreign, floral, not her brand. She noticed the text messages he hid under pillows. But she didn't confront him. Not because she didn't care, but because she feared the truth more than the lie. She prayed harder. Cooked better. Loved deeper. Hoping she could bring him back by becoming softer. But sometimes, the harder you fight for someone who's slipping away, the more foolish you look to them. Jeremiah wasn't seeing her sacrifices anymore. He was too busy chasing the woman who only saw his wallet and not his wounds. One night, Jeremiah came home and didn't remove his shoes. He stood in the living room, looked at his children's drawings on the wall, and sighed like a man at the edge of a cliff. Adana came out of the kitchen, apron stained with stew. She smiled and said, "Welcome." He didn't respond. Instead, he dropped a brown envelope on the table. Divorce papers. Already signed. Already stamped. No explanation. No tears. Just a betrayal wrapped in silence. And then he turned, walked out of the house he once built with dreams, and into Clara's waiting arms. Adana didn't scream. She stood there, staring at the envelope, like it was written in a language she couldn't read. Her knees buckled, but she didn't fall. Women like Adana don't fall in public. They collapse in private. That night, while the kids slept, she sat on the toilet floor and wept into a towel. Not just for the marriage, but for the years she would never get back. The sacrifices that became receipts. The dreams she postponed for a man who traded her love for a lust he couldn't afford. But by morning, Adana did what women like her always do. She survived. Clara welcomed Jeremiah with open arms and Instagram captions. Soft life, she wrote, posing beside him with wine glasses and bedroom selfies. At first, it was paradise. Jeremiah felt young again. Sex was frequent. Nights were wild. The apartment smelled of body mist and ambition. He bought her a used Benz. She decorated the flat with pink curtains and ring lights. But soon, the shine began to fade. Clara had no patience for struggle. She mocked his bank job, complained about his cologne, demanded vacations. And when he refused, her voice became sharp. Her presence, a storm waiting to explode. Adana, meanwhile, was rebuilding from scratch. She sold her wedding rings and paid off debt. Enrolled her kids in public school. Took up private tutoring on weekends. People whispered behind her back. Church women pitied her with forced smiles. But she didn't break. She rose slowly, like bread without yeast, imperfect but steady. Her body ached, her heart heavier than before, but her mind was focused. She would not drown because a man jumped ship. She would row with her bare hands if she had to. Because she had children to raise. A life to rebuild. And tears wouldn't pay bills. Jeremiah didn't visit his kids. Didn't call. He told himself he needed space. That he'd return once things settled with Clara. But months passed. Birthdays came. School fees were due. Adana never begged. She knew better than to chase someone who had already chosen to disappear. Meanwhile, Clara began keeping secrets. Phone calls in the bathroom. New shoes he didn't buy. Whispers in the hallway. Jeremiah felt the shift, the same shift Adana once felt. But this time, he had no one to ask questions. No home to return to. Only his ego, and the woman who was slowly discarding him. One rainy Tuesday, Jeremiah's bank downsized. He was let go with 3 months severance and a weak handshake. He came home early, drenched, holding the letter like a death certificate. Clara didn't ask if he was okay. She asked if he'd still be able to pay rent. That night, she refused to cook. He sat alone in the kitchen, watching his life shrink. The woman he left everything for now felt like a stranger. No warmth. No loyalty. Just entitlement. And for the first time since leaving Adana, Jeremiah felt something heavier than regret. It was fear. Real, suffocating fear. Bills piled up. Clara became distant. Her laughter now reserved for voice notes he wasn't allowed to hear. She started sleeping out. Told him not to wait up. When he questioned her, she rolled her eyes and said, "You're not my husband." The irony tasted bitter. One morning, he woke up and she was gone. No note. No goodbye. Just silence, and the TV missing. His wallet, too. And with that, the glitter disappeared. Jeremiah sat in the middle of the apartment, staring at the ceiling, as if expecting it to collapse. But it didn't. Just like his life, it stayed. In the weeks that followed, he called old friends. None picked up. He called Adana, blocked. He sent her a long text, apologizing, begging, explaining. No reply. He tried to visit the school, but the children didn't recognize him. The younger one called another man with daddy. The older one looked away. That man was Adana's cousin, a quiet, kind man who had helped with fees, dropped them off at school, attended PTA meetings. A man who had shown up, not because he wanted her, but because she needed help. And slowly, help became friendship. Friendship became respect. Respect became something sacred. Jeremiah stood at the gate of the old house one Sunday, heart pounding like Judgment Day. The gate was locked. The paint chipped. Through the bars, he saw her. Adana. Dressed simply, smiling under the mango tree, her children around her like light. She laughed. Real laughter. The kind he hadn't heard in years. The cousin handed her a cup. Their hands touched. She didn't flinch. She didn't look back. Jeremiah waited, hoping. But no one came to open the gate. He was no longer a key holder. Just a man outside, watching the life he threw away blossom without him. The breeze carried voices and smells, fried plantain, children's laughter, peace. Jeremiah wiped his face, unsure if it was rain or tears. In his pocket were crumpled naira notes. The last of his pride. He wanted to speak, to shout, to apologize. But there are wounds that no sorry can reach. There are gates that close forever. He turned away, shoes dragging on gravel, and walked into a street he once ruled. Now a stranger. Now a cautionary tale. Because sometimes, the worst prison is standing outside the life you built, watching someone else live it better than you ever did.